So our speakers today have some presentations for you, but mostly it's going to be a conversation. But before we get into that, just as a reminder, in case you missed the first couple of webinars in this series, this was inspired by this awesome Women on the Land publication that was put together by the University of Massachusetts at Amherst in partnership with the U.S. Forest Service. Let's see. And then and reviewed by folks from Indiana, University of Minnesota, folks from Illinois, also the Women Owning Woodlands Network. So this is a great publication. If you haven't gotten it yet, then check it out. And we can share a link in the chat window. Today's theme under Women on Land, a landowner's guide to stewarding her woodlands. Today we're going to be talking about active stewardship. So within the guide, the section, there's a little bit of information on active stewardship. And for today, rather than having a formal PowerPoint presentation, I decided to invite a few awesome women friends, and Brooke, I'll call you a friend, even though I just met you a couple weeks ago virtually. Friends of mine to talk with all of you. These four women are they're professionals as well as women landowners. So they bring a really wonderful diversity of perspectives to active stewardship of forests. And I would love to imagine us sitting around and drinking hot chocolate and having a nice conversation together about forest stewardship. So I'll introduce them very briefly, but we actually have extended introductions that each of them is going to do. So I'm really thrilled to have today with us Barb Breshek from West Virginia. Brooke Hooshagen is joining us from Wisconsin. Maria Genoviak is joining us from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, and Barry Brusla is joining us from up the road here in coastal Maine. So today is going to be a whole lot of fun. Just to give you kind of the format for today, I'm gonna ask my speakers to do sort of an extended introduction. They're going to each introduce themselves, what they do for work, where their land is, and what they most love about their woodland. And you'll see some really cool photos and maps that they've prepared. Then they're going to go around and also share a story about active stewardship on their land. And there's some great variety. We had a nice warm-up session, and I'm sure we're going to hear some more surprises today. And throughout all of this, I'd love to hear from all of you participants any questions that you have for our speakers. So feel free to put some questions into the chat window. I'll keep an eye on that, and I can work your question into the conversation. After our speakers kind of finish their sharing their stories initially, then we also have lots of time for open questions. And so at that point, you'd be welcome to unmute your microphone and kind of join in the conversation. And we'll have more open questions on this topic of active stewardship. I promise you that the next 90 minutes minus 5 is going to totally fly by. So thanks everybody for joining. And with that, we're going to get started. Barb is going to give us her introduction. What you do for work, or what you did for work, what you do for fun now, where your land is, and what you love most about your woodland. So Barb, take it away.
Okay, so I worked for the West Virginia Division of Forestry for 39 years before I retired. Most of my work was with public lands, managing state forests. And then the last several years, I was managing the landowner assistance program. And through that, I learned about women owning woodlands. And I thought, oh, this sounds like a great program. I'd really like to do this. And it sounds like a good thing to do in retirement. So that's what I'm doing. I'm now co-hosting or co-coordinating Women Owning Woodlands in West Virginia. Welcome to my woods. Okay, now if we can get it to move forward. Let's see. All right.
In the bottom left of your screen, there's a little forward arrow.
I see it. Okay.
There it goes.
All right, so we are located in the Central Appalachians, and also it's considered the foothills of the Cumberland Mountains, excuse me. And we're right about in here. And this is my little piece of heaven. This is a same photo, different angle. In this photo, this hole here is where my house and my outbuildings and where I try to grow tomatoes when I can pipe in enough sunshine. And this photo, there's the house and the outbuildings. This picture was taken the day I was born, so it kind of makes me think I'm in the right place. This is a current aerial photo with leaf off. The green stuff is eastern hemlock up through the hollow here. And yes, I have hemlock woolly adelgia that I've been battling. This is our current dog looking out for squirrels. We've planted some stuff for wildlife on the edges. There's American plum. Also trying to grow some pawpaws big enough to plant out. Red, where they do best if you keep them in the shade until they're about 3 foot tall, and then you can put them out in full sun. Let's head up past the garden and into the woods. What I enjoy most about my property is I can walk in it daily to clear my head and appreciate what the seasons have to offer. And some of our active stewardship, we got a timber stand improvement project that we signed up for in the late 80s. But we also, you'll see a posted sign here, maintaining boundaries. That's an important thing for active stewardship. Know where your land is and what you're working on. And with that timber stand improvement, we were removing trees that were poor quality or species that we didn't necessarily want, and trying to make room for stuff that is going to get big, give it more growing space, chance to grow more mast, and maybe have a timber sale someday. It was considered a pre-commercial thinning because the trees that we were removing were too small to be economically viable to sell for anything, but we used them to grow shiitake mushrooms. Where ours never flushed this heavy, but I couldn't find one of my own pictures. So this is a picture offline, but those are definitely shiitakes in oak logs. And we grew them in everything. We didn't just grow them in oak, we grew them in maple and poplar and birch. Turned out they actually sprout much quicker out of yellow poplar, I guess because it's a softer wood and can be colonized quicker, but they don't last quite as long as the oak logs do. Different things we see, different seasons of the year. A little bit of what our terrain's like. It gets kind of steep in places. Working on laying out a trail here, trying to get away from a lot of the trails that existed were along the creeks, and with some of the real heavy rains we've been having over the years, it's better to get those trails up away from the creeks. Maidenhair fern grows in some nice lush areas. Oyster mushrooms. This is a maple log that we cut off that was blocking the trail, and went up later in the summer and had some oyster mushrooms. Boy, those things are tasty too. Black cohosh. This was way over my head. This plant really got some good growing spots for that. Don't have a lot of it, but I'd like to kind of divide the roots. I learned on some of those forest farming webinars about dividing some of that stuff and transplanting it. Do have some multiflora rose, not a lot, but this part of the woods, there's been some ice damage, and the opening has allowed multiflora rose and some tree of heaven. Got most of the tree of heaven under control. I got to keep an eye on it, make sure it stays that way. But most of our canopy is closed. Thanks for visiting.
Awesome. Oh, that's so great. Thank you so much, Barb. And I saw Heidi had one ear up and one ear down in that last shot. Nice. Great. Well, yeah, thank you so much for that that introductory tour to your woodland. That's really great. And for everybody out there, again, feel free to type questions into the chat window as we go. We are going to go back through all of our speakers and ask them to share a story, and so they'll get into greater detail. But now you've met Barb and had a quick tour of her woodland. So who would like to go next? Brooke, go for it.
All right. Hello, my name is Brooke Hooshagen. I'm coming to you from South Central Wisconsin. I am a forestry technician with Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. Did my screen pop up?
Yep, it's there. And just so everybody knows, Zoom seems to be acting a little bit slow today. It's not just us. So thanks for your patience with the technology.
Okay, so my day job is a forestry technician with Wisconsin DNR. I cruise timber, set up timber sales on state lands, and another big part of my job is wildfire suppression and prescribed burning. So this is work Brooke. This is what I look like and what I do for my day job. And let's see, get the slides to. Can't get them to advance.
Is there can you hit the down arrow on your keyboard? Of course, this worked when we were practicing, but.
Yeah.
Oh, trying again. While Brooke is while Brooke is starting again, Barb, you had a quick question of how many acres you have. Maybe we'll get Barb back in a sec too.
I was typing that in. I've got 26 acres, 25 is in woodland.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right. Oh, and I see,
Okay.
looks like you
see
got
it again.
Yes, and it looks like you have the arrows in the bottom left. There you go. Here we go.
Okay, yep, there are the arrows. Okay, so and this is landowner Brooke, me with my chainsaw chaps and helmet and burning all the invasive species that I cut down. Mainly, we're going after the honeysuckle. I've got a little bit of barberry. You name it. Southern Wisconsin is kind of full of it. So that's this is landowner Brooke. We own about 7.5 acres. This is my family. My husband Ryan and my 3 girls, Zane, Tess, and Ezra. The things we love most about our 7.5 acres of woods is just like Barb said, you know, we can go and take a quick walk and clear our head. My husband is pictured here with he's a hunter, so I call this his kill from our woods, a nice black cherry tree that we had milled up. And this was the fruits of his labor. This was our COVID project, a tree house for our girls. So that was a real fun family activity to do together. So we used some red cedar for the ladder, and you can see this, the cherry lumber on the prow of the house and some of the railing. We spent a lot of time out in our woods, just walking around, exploring. The girls are having a good time. I think this is what my childhood was like too, just roaming around in the woods, just finding and exploring. So that's one thing we enjoy. We also have some bees. We kept some bees. We started a few years ago, and the real joy was a couple years later being able to harvest that honey. So that's another part of what we love to do. We have a little bit of pollinator area in our woods. Our woods is mainly all wooded, and we like to watch the bees and use the fruits of their labor. Like Barb too, we like to harvest mushrooms on the property. Wisconsin has a very tasty mushroom called the morel. We also have some shiitake logs, and I have also put some spawn down for some other mushrooms, and we found the oyster mushrooms too. So lots of similarities between Barb's place and mine. I saw a lot of the same plants that we have here too. So we enjoy foraging. This was years ago. This is actually, so we added another one. We planted a bunch of white pine in our woods. Unfortunately, they didn't do so hot. So I can't find any remnants of this particular planting day, but it's a memory at least that we gave it a whirl. We're constantly planting new species and making more holes in the canopy for things like that. So family time is big. I also love goats. We have an interesting home. It's an earth home, so we have grass on our roof here. And one of the first adventures with our goats was putting the goats on the roof to help trim the grass there. So the goat business has grown. I have my part-time gig is goat grazing for invasive species. So we rent our goats out to both private landowners and whoever wants to hire us to help with the invasives. battle. My girls are getting old enough to help me with it now, and these are our junior herders getting the goats off the trailer for another job. Of the goats and having the land is, of course, springtime when all the babies come. So the girls are very eager to help with the goats when the babies are out in the pasture. So that's another perk of owning land and being able to create our little hobby farm. We also have a small pine plantation in the rear that will eventually be thinning out too. Lots of TSI to work on, like Barb said too, but controlling invasives is our first goal, and we'll get to the rest of the stuff as time allows. I guess when you own land, you realize it's a marathon, not a sprint. So thank you for allowing me to be with you today.
Wow, beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that, Brooke. I'm sure the others agree, but like every slide, I thought that the kids and the goats couldn't get any cuter, and then they did. So you certainly have your hands full over there. And wow, treehouse, that's quite a silver lining to a pandemic project there. So really, wow, nicely done. And Maria wants a copy of the treehouse plans for her new home office.
Nice, nice. Yeah, my husband's a contractor. I should have mentioned that too. So it was his talents, of course. So thanks.
Very cool. Yay. Maria, do you want to go next since you're interested in treehouse plans?
Yeah, and contrary to what people might think, I'm not in a treehouse or a sauna right now. It just looks like it. Yeah, I'm queuing up my slideshow, and of course, it's taken a second. All right. Well, my name is Maria Chinoviak, and I am calling to you today from Michigan's Upper Peninsula. There we go. There's the right one. So you can see it on the map up here in terms of where we are on not too far from Lake Superior. My background is that I actually have a background with math and bachelor's and master's in forest ecology and management. So I'm a forester by training. I actually met my husband in forestry school, so he's a forester as well. He's a consulting forester, cameoed here on our woods, and so he actually works a lot with private woodland owners. And so we got our property in 2 parcels in 2016, and then expanded it a little bit a couple years ago when we were able to pick up an adjacent lot. We live out on what we call Otter Point Woods is our property. We live out here 6 months a year because it's a floodplain forest, which will kind of be a teaser into some of my stewardship issues. So we're out here 6 months a year during the growing season when things aren't flooded or covered with snow. And it's just a mix of woods and wetlands and old fields. It's totally it's floodplain forest. And really the thing is even though we have it's really fun because my Rex is really into hunting and just being outside. I'm really into gardening. And so this is totally recreational, land for fun. And so when it came to writing the management plan, he's like, I do that for work. So I wrote the management plan for the forest for Tree Farm. And we've really kind of, worked together on a lot of the different projects that we have. As you can see the property there, it's super interesting in that it's this peninsula that sticks out into the lake, and it has this crazy history where it actually was a lake and then was sediment deposited by a river, and then the river was rerouted for various long story reasons. And so we literally have 15 acres that was lake prior to 1913, and in the aerial photos, it didn't even have actual land until the river was moved in the 1970s. So it's this incredible history of just this really spectacular, weird property with a I don't know, a mile of shoreline or something. And so we really think a lot about water quality and habitat, and our goals are really centered around thinking about just how to diversify the forest. The other part I forgot to mention is when I was talking about my background, Amanda's probably like, get to it, Maria, is that my specialty now is I work for the Forest Service, and I work for a group called the Northern Institute of Applied Climate Science. And so my work that I do now is actually focused on helping foresters and natural resource professionals and woodland owners think about how to manage their lands for climate change. And so it's been interesting as I work on the management plan and the management for the property of trying to bring this climate change adaptation piece into our work as well. So that's a really big part of the work that I do here. So here you can see kind of where our dock is, and kind of this slough that we have that goes out to the lake. And again, we're trying to, really think about the water quality. And so we have a lot of forested edges that we're maintaining and diversifying that I'll talk about more later. And then, yeah, it's also just because we're so far north that these floodplain forests are very uncommon. And so this is really interesting in that there's not many forests like this type at all in our landscape. And so that's a really, really cool part of it. And it's great to be out this time of year and see a lot of spring ephemerals and collect leeks and all the things we do this time of year. Although the bugs came out 2 days ago, and it's very quickly becoming miserable to be outside because there's a lot of water and a lot of swamp and a lot of mosquitoes, even in a dry year like this year.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing, Maria. Yeah, we look forward to seeing more of your woods and hearing a little bit more about that in a bit. So we have gone from West Virginia in Barb's backyard to Wisconsin in Brooke's backyard to the UP in Maria's backyard. And now we are going to turn to Mid-Coast, Maine. Barry, are you ready to share your screen and introduce us to your woodlot?
Sure. Okay, can you see that?
Not quite. So did you select what you wanted to
No,
share?
I had what I was, what we had done before.
So you got to go to share screen. So
Okay. Okay,
So in Zoom, then you go to share screen and then you choose the PowerPoint. There it goes.
okay, yeah.
All right, and then that same slideshow thing as before.
Yeah.
Ooh, one over. Sorry, and the top slideshow.
Slideshow, there goes.
First slide. Awesome. Thank you,
Okay,
Barry.
thank you. Okay, so I'm Barry Brusela. I live in Warren, Maine, and you can see our property is right on a lake on North Pond, which is one of probably 200 North Ponds in the state of Maine. And it's a property that's been in my family since the 1940s. My great aunt and uncle bought the property back then, and it was just land. They built the house, and my sister and I later on built a barn. But I guess one of the things I like about it is the family history. I couldn't really narrow down what I liked about the property to one thing. So I guess it's the family history, the lake, and then also the fact that I live here and I can just walk here anytime, and it's like immediate happy place. So that's one of the things I like about it. I'm a consulting forester. I've been working with private landowners and land trusts and towns primarily in Mid-Coast, Maine for the last 25 years, but I've worked all over the state really. And as a consulting forester, I work with landowners, helping them figure out their objectives and writing management plans and then carrying out timber sales. So I really like the operational part of forestry. And this is a picture of a timber harvest on our land that was finished last summer. So it's been just about a year. And in our meeting getting ready for this, we talked about timber harvesting, and people might be wondering what harvest looks like before, during, and after. So these are a few pictures that I would like to share about this. This was a harvest at an oak stand right near the lake. Again, it was finished last summer. You can still see some of the brush. It was done with a logger who had a skidder, so that it was not chipped. The brush was left on the ground, and this is what it looks like. To some people, it looks kind of messy. You want to clean it up, but this brush actually provides wildlife habitat. And also, as it rots, it puts nutrients and organic matter back into the soil. So that's a good thing. The park lake might look good to some people, but for an ecological perspective, it's not really the best. So, and this is another picture in another area away from the lake that was harvested. Again, it was finished about a year and a half ago. And I just took these pictures a few days ago so you can see there's not a whole lot of green really coming up yet. The regeneration and plants haven't really started yet. But this was a partial thinning. It was a selection harvest in oak, pine, and hemlock, and red maple and birch. That's kind of what we have in this part of the state. And here's another picture of another part of the woodlot that was harvested longer ago. And we've done partial harvest for probably the last 25 years or so. And this has been a little bit longer. You can really not see much for slash there, but you can see the regeneration coming up, and there's more what I call, foresters call vertical diversity, which is a variety of tree heights and sizes and that sort of thing, which to me makes a more resilient type of forest in this time of climate change. Plus, it looks really good too. We have lots of trails going through here. Here's another picture of an area that's been harvested a while ago. And again, you can see kind of the range, diversity of species and sizes and that sort of thing. And that's kind of what I strive for on our own land, as well as, you know, when I work with other landowners as well. And lots of times you know, a lot of landowners aren't really set up to or have the interest or ability to do their own logging, but there are a lot of things you can do on your own land. It doesn't require a whole lot of skills or equipment or anything like that. This in the middle of the photo is a brush pile that one of my daughters and I made several years ago. And it's kind of squashed down now over the years of ice and snow. It used to be a lot fluffier. But anyway, doing things like building brush piles, putting up bird boxes or owl boxes. Those are all things you can do on your own land, and it really helps to keep you engaged and get you out and traveling around in different areas, which is a great thing. I also wanted to point out in this picture, this was a area that we had cut that was a little bit more open than some of the other areas. You can see the difference in the regeneration. It's really taller and more robust. So openings in the woods aren't always bad. It depends really on what your objectives are and what you're trying to grow. I'm kind of geeking out on the forestry stuff here. I'm hopefully this isn't too much, but this is kind of a different thing that landowners can do on their woods, which I've really had a lot of fun with in the last year. I have a game camera, and you can see on the big white ash tree on the right-hand side, if you see the bottom of it, there's a strap going around the tree, and that's my camera. And on the ash tree on the left, you can't really see it, but I have a little suet feeder that's down near the ground, and it's empty now, but over the winter I fed it. I put suet in there, and this was on the recommendation of a wildlife biologist I know, to just see what I could attract. And I've got some pictures upcoming to show from my game camera, which is pretty cool. And that's something it really can help you enjoy what's going on in your woodlot, and it doesn't take a whole lot of effort to do it. And this is the main trail leading into our woodlot. And we did some work on it last year. We kind of put it to bed and seeded it in. So it makes a great recreation trail as well. And there's some pictures. There's a couple of deer and coyote and a fisher. That was really fun seeing that in our woodlot. And I've got some other photos too of turkeys and stuff like that. Of course, there's the usual squirrels and woodpeckers coming after stuff. But anyway, this is a pretty fun thing. And this is a picture of our barn. Years ago, and I guess this is 1989, my sister and I were living here, and we cut the wood from our woodlot to build this barn. It's mostly spruce and pine, and we did the wood cutting and had the wood sawn out locally, and had a crew of 2 people actually do the building. So that's another thing you can do on your land, is to have the wood cut. At the time, my sister had a team of horses, so we pulled out the wood using the horses, and I honed up my chainsaw skills to cut down these big trees, and it all worked out. It was quite an experience, but it's a lovely barn, and we still have it. But I guess I just want to say with you, the whole family thing, the property had been in my family, like I said, since the 40s. And then my dad, my dad inherited it. And when he passed away a couple of years ago, my sisters and I divided it up. So I got the house and about 13 acres, which is mostly fields and mostly wetlands. My sisters got more fields and more woodland. The whole property is about 79 acres. So we divided it up. We managed to do that amiably, and lots of talking and lots of walking and figuring out where the roads and access were going to be. But that's a really important thing for land, is to think about the transition to the next generation. And I feel fortunate that my sisters and I were able to work that out amiably. It doesn't always happen that way. But anyway, that's been kind of a special part of it for me. And I guess I'll just stop there.
Awesome. You got a compliment on your barn, Barry.
Yes, well, you can't really see, there's solar panels on the top, but you can't really quite see it in the photo.
Nice.
Yeah.
All right. So you can stop your screen share. There you go. You did have a question. Someone asked, what did you seed your road with, or your main trail with?
It was just a conservation mix, I think, bought from the local feed store. And then we mulched it, raked it in and then just mulched it. And it worked out pretty well.
Cool. Thank you.
Yep.
All right. So thanks for those lovely intros from everybody. This is great. So I know that we have participants that are interested in keeping deer at bay, and we also have participants that are interested in invasives. I did ask each of you to prepare a little, just a little quick story about a goal that you set for taking care of something on your land. What motivated you to act? What challenges did you encounter, and how did it turn out? What did you learn? So we can go in any order if you feel. Who would like to start sharing your story first? And again, keep those questions coming in the chat window for everybody else.
I don't mind going first. We'll just
All right.
we can follow the same order we did with our presentations.
Okay.
So we bought our place in 1987, and I wanted to make it a tree farm, and so felt like, we needed to do some active management. I knew the woods needed some work, so I went ahead and signed up for, at the time it was called FIP. It was Forest Improvement Practice, and it was handled through some forestry funding. And now that type of stuff is handled through what's called NRCS, or Natural Resources Conservation Service. It was a contract, so I had to get it done in a certain amount of time, which was good and bad. We hadn't had the property that long. The house was a shack that needed work. I was working full-time, and anyone that works forestry full-time, that those aren't just 8-hour days around the corner. So it was like weekends trying to get stuff done, and I ended up having to get an extension and kind of swore off applying for funding anymore and thinking, well, I'll do the rest of the stuff on my own, which has worked out pretty good. I did apply more recently for a forestry stewardship practice, where if you've been done a lot of work on your property, you can apply for this and compete, but it didn't get funded. I was going to try to grow ramps and some more golden seal and some other medicinals. And then they did away with the program. So, of course. One of the things I learned, in addition to the fact that, this time frame, and you got to be aware that there's constraints on how much time you have to get the project done. And a lot of times the foresters will make sure that the landowners are aware of that, so they don't try to do more than they think it can actually get done. I only did TSI on half of my property, which was good. I mean, had I tried to do the whole property, I definitely wouldn't have gotten it done in that time frame. And the other area has just been whittled on as we had time. Use it for firewood, use it for shiitake logs. I also learned that my husband is not safe with a chainsaw. He thought he was going to show me the quick way of getting a tree down, and then the tree fell down and knocked him down, and then I had to get the tree off of his legs and took the saw away from him. Now I do the cutting and he moves the wood. So that was a lesson learned. So yeah, that's basically the story of our big project. Most everything else has just been things that haven't been quite so involved, or things that I can do as I feel like I have time to or want to work on those projects.
Great, thank you, Barb. That's awesome. We had a question that actually was directed toward Maria, but Barb, you might be able to address this as well. So Sherry's asking, so she was saying to Maria, you have a unique ephemeral world. Thank you for sharing. Have you done any active planting to increase the biodiversity of your ephemeral plants? And Barb, I know you had mentioned some planting and stuff. Have you done any of that kind of work?
All I did was on the edges, trying to get more diversity and trying to get some more wildlife, things that are useful for wildlife. Unfortunately, also the deer want to eat the young seedlings before they can produce any fruit that will benefit other wildlife. But we're doing okay with some of it. So the American plum, I don't know that deer got any of them. They just, I didn't have that many of them survive. I think I put out maybe a dozen. I think I counted the other day, I've got 4 that are still alive, and it's only been 2 years. But you know, you just keep trying. And then I put out some hazelnut. There was some hazelnut growing along the main creek. It's not actually on our property, but the adjoining landowners are absentee landowners, and they let me play over there. So I put out some more, trying to spread that out and trying to cut some of the multiflora back. And then of course the highways department came through with a cutter and cut most of them down. So no good deed goes unpunished. We have tried to plant stuff in the woods, but it's just not enough light. And then the pawpaws, I have some areas where I've cleared out some brush. There's kind of a brushy area between where we maintain a lawn and where our woods begin. We've got about 1 acre cleared and about 25 acres of woods. And so some of those places, I'm trying to either maintain stuff that's there, or like I said, with the pawpaws, trying to do some of that type of planting.
Great, thank you. I know I'm going slightly slightly out of order. Maria, since the question was directed toward you, do you want to just speak briefly about any ephemerals or anything you've done to increase biodiversity of your ephemeral plants?
Yeah, and if it's okay, can I just tell my story and kind of tie it in at the end?
Sure.
So, okay, great. And then I saw there was a question about about tree farm, and so yeah, you should definitely check out the American tree farm system. I'm sure I get this queued up. Amanda can provide a link, but it's a great program for woodland owners. All right, and that's what we did with our property. All right, so I'm going to jump ahead a little bit just because it's a little bit easier to answer the ephemeral question in the context of my whole property. So as I mentioned, we have a floodplain, this floodplain forest, and it's a mix of mainly ash and silver maple. There's elm, but of course they are, kind of have this cyclic existence with Dutch elm disease. And so a lot of ash and sugar maple. So when we bought the property, being 2 foresters, we knew that emerald ash borer was going to be, an issue that was going to be coming, but I think it moved pretty slowly in our landscape. In 10 years, it barely moved in our local community. And then it must have hit some sort of ability to have a certain population. And so then it all of a sudden kind of expanded very quickly. So where we thought we had maybe 10 years before we'd see emerald ash borer mortality. And when I wrote my plan, it was kind of thinking that it ended up being about 2. And so very quickly after getting the property, we started to get signs of emerald ash borer. And then within the last year, we've had dieback and starting to see exit holes and sort of these classic symptoms of emerald ash borer. And there are some areas in our woodlot that are almost pure, that are really pure ash, and pockets that are pure ash, and then other areas that are more of a mix of ash and silver maple. And so what we've been doing is, because we do heat with wood and we live in a landscape where a lot of people do, we've worked with a friend of ours who does firewood processing to essentially remove some of the ash in areas that are really heavy to ash and very where we would expect there to be a lot of issues with dead trees falling on roads and trails. And so this has been kind of my our big stewardship challenge that we're kind of facing. And so if you look at our property, the orange line here is our trails. is kind of our primary trail system. And so kind of in the middle of what our friends' kids have termed the lollipop trail. So our little loop road, the lollipop trail, that whole center is very heavy to ash and was very open grown. We also have a lot of reed canary grass as well in the understory. So the fear is we get ash, you know, falling onto our trails, we get a ton of reed canary grass, and then we're just kind of stuck with a really simplified system. So we've been doing in our plan is the edges of the property along the water tend to have a lot more diversity. They tend to have more silver maple, willow, tag alders. They tend to have a lot more mixture of species, which is great. So we can leave all of that periphery, all of those shorelines largely intact and just hands off, and the trails don't go there. And then in those areas that have the trails, we can really focus on removing ash in those areas because they tend to be heavier towards ash because they're a little drier. They're the drier soils. And then it's nice because we can kind of just make sure that we're not going to be cleaning dead wood up off of our trails for the next 20 years, you know. So what I've been doing is developing a plan for planting in these. And really it is diversity. So I'm going to talk about trees, but then I'll get to talking about understory plants as well. And so within this lollipop trail kind of area, this has been the primary area. And so the center of the gap, and just to flip back. So this is the big gap in basically you're looking at like the center of the trail there. So we have this large gap. The trees were very open grown and spread out to begin with. And so they're, yeah, it didn't take much to open it, honestly. Those areas that are really heavy, really open are going to get, I planted swamp white oak, bitternut hickory, black walnut. These aren't species that are native, but they're expected to do better in under climate change, and they're not troublemakers, they're not invasive. And then along the edges, where there tends to be more diffuse light, more diversity, going with basswood, which is native, basswood, sycamore, and swamp white oak. And so really trying to diversify the forest here with a lot of species that have, you know, produce nuts and a lot of other wildlife value, like basswood is a great pollinator, species for pollinators. So this is what the planting looked like. This is my weekend. We planted, I think, 183-ish trees. I was trying to count up. So we have really high snow falls and pretty severe winters. So our deer densities tend to be pretty low. But I use tree tubes in the more focus location or like more open locations. But then areas where I thought the deer wouldn't want to go, I just flagged trees, and sometimes I pulled sticks, like, you know, if there was brush, I would just kind of pull some sticks sort of over the seedling to help protect it and maybe give it a little bit of shading and stuff. Or I just like would kind of tuck them into the edges of these windrows and our nice, beautiful habitat that we have there. But then, yeah, like this is kind of part of a bigger piece to diversify it. And so I've been doing a lot more with trying to grow my own plants in terms of cuttings and seed collection and then dispersal. And so, for instance, on the ephemerals part is we have a lot of ephemerals. I haven't done a lot, but I am looking at like, I've been eyeing up Trillium and Jack in the Pulpit and definitely being like, when those are seeding to be able to kind of pick them up and kind of move them to similar soil conditions is definitely something that's on the horizon. I have an area of my vegetable garden that's dedicated to plants and has some trees healed in. And then also just like woods edges, trying to like reduce lawn and mow area by putting in elderberry and fruiting shrubs and just kind of putting in a lot more native shrubs as well. That's that.
Very cool. Thanks for sharing, Maria. And the chat always disappears, but Starlet says that she sent a large box of black walnut seeds to her dad in Houghton County, north of you. So nicely done.
Yep, mine are from central Wisconsin that I collected with my dad. So we got a nice theme going there.
Yay, very nice. So bringing us back to central Wisconsin, Brooke, do you want to share your stewardship story?
Sure. When we moved here, we bought the property in 2009, and a huge part of my regular job is dealing with invasive species through timber sales and you know, getting control of the invasive before sale is really one of the only ways we can get proper regeneration in southern Wisconsin. So we moved into a property that was just infested with invasives, and I guess the benefit of working in natural resources, you have connections with folks in other organizations. So we reached out to NRCS, and we knew there were some cost sharing programs available. Similar to Barb, we signed up for the EQIP program. So it's, I had to look it up what it was. It's an environmental quality incentives program through NRCS. So we signed up for that, and very similar again to Barb. One main thing I want to caution folks on is biting off more than you can handle. So we signed up for just an acre per year, and it sounds very small, but working full time and having young children and part-time jobs, you know, things like that, and having a timeline and a deadline, I caution people to not bite off too much. So I'll share my screen and pop up a few slides of before and afters of what we did with both the EQIP program, and we are in the CSP program too. That one is the Conservation Stewardship Program. So that with that program, we were able to get some pollinator funding and for our bees. So here is my my warning slide, I guess. So first thing is have a plan, what you want to do. Stewardship plan, I think, is probably a common lifeline for landowners and for all of us on the panel. And those can be, you know, prepared by a private consultant, DNR forester, you know, folks, you know. It's good to have a plan on your objectives are clear. So again, I like to look for cost sharing, because who doesn't like to get some monetary help, because it's not cheap to take on these things. So it's nice sharing opportunities. And then know that there's a variety of tools to use. You know, it's not necessarily just a timber harvest. It's not always, you know, herbicides. There's other ways to make things happen. You know, goats are a very, you know, environmentally friendly way to do things. We used a combination. Some folks don't like herbicides at all. I use them very sparingly. And again, I like starting small and set your goals so you know where you're going. So this is a before and after right on our driveway. Very, very thick brush layer, and it was all invasive stuff. So like I mentioned, we do have a lot of TSI to do, but step number one is getting control of the invasives, and then we're going to clear out the poor formed, low quality stems in the canopy and mid canopy. And eventually we'll start introducing some more native shrub layer in there, maybe some hazelnuts or high bush cranberries, things like that. We do have some trees planted, mainly oaks. And again, we have a huge deer population, so we need to protect our regeneration with tree tubes. So our first step, we moved in the goats. So we had the goats clear it up, and they're a great tool to clear it up, you know, 5 to 7 feet tall. So we can actually walk through it and enter it with our chainsaws. I use the cut stump method. So we were cutting the stems off and then just applying a small bit of herbicide on the cut stem itself. This is looking down my driveway. The right side, I guess, is the main focus. The left side looked like that as well, but this picture was taken after we had already controlled the left side, both with goats and chainsaws and herbicides. So it's always a work in progress. These photos aren't exactly fair because the befores are, you know, midsummer, and the ones on the right are springtime now. So there's not full leaf out, but you get kind of a picture of what it looked like before and what it looks like now. We're opening it up to more sunlight. We're getting a lot more of the wildflowers and the native things coming back. Wild geranium, jack in the pulpit, the trilliums. Those things are just going wild. It's really, really cool. Here's another before and after. You can see the burl on the cherry tree for reference up there. Starting on the left, this was when the goats, you know, that's the goat netting in there. And then after all our work, this is an area where we have a bat house. That's part of the CSP program as well. you get credit for having those. We use prescribed burning as a tool too, to help control those invasive sprouts. We had a perfect fall for burning. Everything was very, very dry. Oops. And we were able to get a really good burn and a good kill on the buckthorn sprouts. Honeysuckle, I got a good top kill, but I'm having to resort to my shovel to get rid of that honeysuckle. It helped, I guess, reduce what I have to pick up with my shovel, but boy, it's a nasty one around here. I have amber honeysuckle, and that's a bad one. So prescribed burning was another tool I used, and used appropriately. It's definitely a good one. This is our, I guess, after effect of our pollinator habitat. This is all seeded in with plants for pollinators, butterflies, bees. It was a Pheasants Forever mix. I couldn't tell you all of the seeds that are in there, but it was a seed mix that we got from Pheasants Forever. On the center of the photo is our bat houses that we installed. And this is just a nice little photo of one of the kind of a prime specimen of a jack in the pulpit. So yeah, so it's a work in progress. I've got garlic mustard everywhere, basically. And that's one I just don't have the time and effort to worry about that anymore. It's just everywhere, and we're doing what we can. The fire did help a little bit in some of the areas, but getting control of the brushy stuff was key. And again, starting small, doing an acre per year for my husband and I to tackle. So that's kind of my story and my guidance, I guess.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Brooke. Yeah, it's great to see all those additional pictures in there. You talked about a lot of invasives, and I know when we did our warm-up session, then that was kind of a running theme. I guess a quick highlight from that, someone mentioned garlic mustard pesto could be a solution to help make good use of that pesky garlic mustard. We had a participant who was asking about Japanese knotweed. So I don't know, Brooke, if you want to talk about it, or if Barry, if you have additional thoughts, but let me get to her question. So Linda asks, can anyone speak on techniques to control Japanese knotweed? I've heard folks are experimenting with using small gauge wire mesh carpets to strangle the shoots rather than covering with tarps or cutting with herbicide. So I
can honestly say I don't have a whole lot of experience with it. I know it exists, and it's getting more and more prevalent on the landscape. I know it's just a really tough one with those roots and rhizomes. Any disturbance to the soil, any little piece of root can, take root again. So I don't have a good answer for that. I think that one again is a marathon battle. It's a tough one. I don't know if anybody knows more about that, but I guess I don't really.
It seems like you covered every other invasive plant that's out there. So thank you, Brooke. All right, let's turn over to Barry. Barry, I don't know if you have an answer to Japanese knotweed or if you want to dive in with other stuff, but would you share a stewardship story?
Okay, just a little bit about Japanese knotweed. I don't have much experience with that because it is not as common as as a woodland invasive. I've seen it more like where people have brought in fill for making wood trails or roads or something like that, and it gets brought in that way. I have heard that if you just repeatedly mow it down and cut it down, that can help, but it doesn't always grow nicely in nice flat places to mow. If it grows on a stone wall or something like that, it's a lot tougher to deal with. So, and I don't have any slides of my woodland project. It's like Brooke, it's basically dealing with invasives, because for years I'm always lecturing my clients about, oh, you got to deal with your invasives, deal with it and deal with it. And meanwhile, I was too busy working on other people's woodlots to really address the issue on my own. And we had a lot of the shrubby honeysuckle. And, this place was an old farm once, and what happens often on farms is over the bank, people throw stuff and it just ends up there, and it's kind of like a junk pile. So anyway, we had a lot of honeysuckle. So like Brooke, I got cost share funding through the Natural Resource Conservation Service to do several practices, including the brush piles that you saw earlier. And we did about 10 acres of invasives control. And some of that was done with a friend of mine who had actually a tractor pulling out the really big ones, and another contractor colleague who was a licensed applicator pulling, spraying a lot of it that was spread through the woods. And after that, I planted a bunch of native wildlife shrubs in the area where I had yanked out all the other stuff. My problem is I haven't done follow-up the way I should. This project was done about 8 years ago, and you really have to keep up with it. Invasives are not something you can ever cross off your to-do list, because you really need to check every year. And if you have one area that kind of slips by you, it'll sneak back and expand again. And it's always a challenge too, because often if you have invasives, your neighbors do. And if they're not dealing with their invasives, it's like a constant source of infestation, of reinfestation on your land. So that's always a challenge. Another challenge is often when we're, as humans, disturbing habitat, freshly turned soil or bringing in fill or something like that, we encourage the establishment of invasives. And even things like establishing openings in the crown canopy to attract new birds, which sounds like a great thing. Then those new birds might bring seeds into the forest openings. So I guess I'm trying to say nothing is all black and white, and you just have to keep working at it. And in the long run, I don't really know if what's worse, the use of invasives, or the use of herbicides, if that's going to be worse in the long run than just letting the invasives take over. And right now I'm kind of on the side of dealing with invasives with all the tools that are appropriate in a given place, but we still don't really know. We just do the best we can with the tools that we have today. So that's my ongoing management challenge on our property.
Thanks for sharing, Barry. And I know Barry has a habit of pulling up Japanese barberry and then hanging it upside down on another plant to teach those other Japanese barberry a lesson. Oh, and do you still have your weed wrench?
I do. And that's
Yeah.
a great tool for invasives control. It's called a weed wrench, and then a newer version is called Puller Bear. And you can just Google Puller, like P-U-L-L-E-R, bear, like the animal. And it's a very effective tool that you can carry around in the woods, and you can pull out stems that are up to several inches in diameter. And it's very hard work and very gratifying and effective. I have one particular woodlot I've been managing about 20 years, pulling out Japanese barberry, which is a horrible thing. And I've been able to basically control that mechanically. You have to keep after it again, but yeah, that's a great tool, and it costs less than a couple $100 and is very effective in dealing with invasives.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, we are in a perfect amount of time to open up the floor for lots of questions. So Leonora, if you wouldn't mind spotlighting all of our speakers. And at this point, I'm going to give our participants the ability to unmute yourselves. So if you have a question that you'd like to ask out loud, please feel free to do so. So to sort of recap, I've seen a few questions in the chat that's related to brush. So leaving brush after a timber harvest, or purposefully creating brush piles. So I wonder if any of you want to talk a little bit about when you would leave brush, or why you would leave brush, and maybe a little bit more about the NRCS cost share, and why would someone pay you to leave brush on your land?
I can tackle that. Brush and itself, as it lands from a harvest, is usually in pretty good shape to provide wildlife habitat and soil protection. Making the piles, I mean, that was something we did with NRCS. The more practice you have, the more likely you are to get funding. So that was kind of one of the reasons I did it. But I did ask a wildlife biologist colleague of mine once, are these really a lot better than just the brush that is naturally on the ground? And he said, no, not really. So for some people, it makes it look better. You really wouldn't be able to put all your brush in your woodlot in piles. That would take forever. Plus, I don't think that really would be the best thing for the ground anyway. But But anyway, like I said earlier, having it spread on the ground is a great thing. One thing that's important is to, if it's really high, like if you have a spruce tree that blows over, and sometimes they have very rigid tops and branches, and the branches might stick 10 or 12 feet up in the air. It'll take a really long time for any brush like that to rot, and it makes it really hard to move around. And also it's more of a fire hazard, that once wood material is down close to the ground, it stays moister and it rots faster. So really the only time I would say, you know, hack it up some more is if you have a lot of blowdowns that are high up in the air. It can, like I said, it takes longer to rot and it's more of a fire hazard.
Yeah, I would be really interested in hearing kind of Brooke from the fire perspective, because I think that's a little different if you're in a fire dependent ecosystem and you need to be thinking about that and the dynamics. But, you know, I think from, you know, some of the science too is, you know, it's nutrients and, you know, it provides organic matter and it can help really moderate the soil conditions, you know, in terms of being able to just, you know, that like diffuse shading can be really good for just retaining soil and protecting from drought or protecting from extreme rain events. And so, yeah, I think there are times where if you have a lot of down wood, it can be troublesome. I think if you're in a fire prone system or fire dependent system, you need to think about kind of where it fits ecologically. But my theory, and I'm a gardener too, I'm a messy forest, messy gardens, like that's how it's supposed to be, because that's good for nutrients, it's good for wildlife. And so, you know, you don't need to create work for yourself. By just kind of, you know, trying to make things clean. Leave it messy unless there's a reason to clean it up.
Yeah, and as Barry had mentioned, I think she said she had would pull some sticks in, or maybe it was Brooke. Somebody was pulling stuff in to cover up seedlings. And I know when we were doing timber harvest on state forests, some of the loggers would bring in whole trees, and they had a machine that would strip the limbs off of the tree, and they had a grapple skidder. So they had this big claw type contraption on the back of a skidder, and they would take those tops back into the woods, and we would have them spread them around in the areas where there's stumps that we wanted to regenerate. That would make it more hard for the deer to get in there, and so the deer, being lazy, would hopefully let those trees sprout and regenerate the site.
Yeah, that's a great tactic that we're starting to explore more and more, is you know, leaving that slash in the regeneration areas just to kind of trick the deer and make it harder for them to chomp them down. Yeah.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I'll briefly mention that there's a thing called slash walls that the Cornell slash wall resource center in upstate New York is developing. I'll drop a link to a video with a little bit more about slash walls, and again, trying to protect your forest, your little trees from deer. We had another question in the chat. Maura asks, any advice for vinca or periwinkle?
This has come up. So I'm also a master gardener, and I'm on the land trust. So I've been doing some native plant gardening pieces, and this comes up a lot in those conversations. In terms of these, you know, if you're in a residential setting or by your house, you can, or I mean, these are escapees, right? You can have vinca, you can have bishop's weed, you know, you can have a lot of these. You know, I think the first thing is, you know, to really try and think about limiting the spread, you know, of these. And so being, you know, trying to think more about if they're in your yard, trying to kind of make sure that they're not going into the forest. If you're inheriting them or you're really wanting to get rid of them, there's, you know, they like sun. And so, you know, it's either like one of these things where you have to like dig it up and get like every sort of weed, you know, every sort of root fragment. And if you're really thorough, you have to be really thorough, but if you're really thorough, you can get rid of it. The, you know, other way is to kind of think about, are there ways to break it up, you know, by kind of shading it out. With vinca, it's a little harder, or punching holes in it. So selective use of herbicide or mulching and planting something that's going to outcompete it. And I'm wondering if Barbara knows the name of the plant offhand, but I know that there is at least where I am kind of in the Midwest, there's a shade tolerant native plant people were having good luck with competing with garlic mustard. I'm gonna have to try and figure out what it is. But anyway, there are some plants where if you think about these not invasive, but a little bit more aggressive, a little bit hardier, kind of rough elbows native plants. If you can get them established, it's probably your best bet. See if I can remember what that plant was.
Cool, thank you. And if you find it, feel free to type it into the chat. So again, participants, you are able to unmute yourselves. So we'll give you a few seconds if you want to try to unmute and ask a question out loud. You're welcome to. If not, I have a couple of questions I can throw in the mix. Or feel free to type questions into the chat window as well.
Sorry, you guys, I was unmuted, but I didn't have my microphone on. So this is Star. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was curious about ponds and putting a pond in a certain spot on the edge of the forest. And this might not be on topic, but it's just something that we've been talking about here at the house. Looks like a good place for it right on the edge of, we have about, what is it? 30 acres of woods. So I didn't know, habitat, wildlife, if it would contribute or degrade from the health of the forest.
I can try and answer that a little bit or start off. What state are you in?
We're in Western North Carolina.
Okay. Each state and pretty much each county throughout the country has what's called a soil and water conservation district.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a really good source of information that's quasi-government, and quasi-nonprofit. But that would be a good place to start to get information, because each state has different rules about what you can do and not do regarding digging and changing water courses and collecting water and all that sort of thing. So it really, you need to know what your own state regulations are, and they're a good place to start, because they will know about that, and they'll also know about, maybe if there's any cost share programs to help, or technical, even if there isn't technical advice on how to build a pond for your particular area or soils type. But your local soil and water conservation district would be a good place to start for information in your area.
Great, thanks. And I see the link in the chat too about the web soil stuff.
All right, thank you. Thanks for the question and thanks for the answer. We have I think a clarifying question in the chat. Barb, we'll pitch this one to you. Linda's asking, she says, Barb said something about deer not eating regeneration because of openings in treetops. Maybe I got it wrong, because I thought the canopy, opening the canopy let small plants grow, but the deer would eat them. So can you tell us a little bit more about deer and tops and
Okay,
canopy caps?
I'm referring to when you have a tree cut and the top is on the ground, the top then being moved to an area or used to cover stumps or other places where you want some regeneration to thrive. The deer will not be so inclined to climb through those treetops if there's easier stuff to get to. Does that answer your question?
Cool. Yeah, she said, thanks, she understands. Yeah, and if anybody else wants to comment about seedlings or small plants that grow in openings in the canopy, this might be an interesting time to address that as well.
I think species selection is very important too. If you don't necessarily know what type of soils you have or what trees grow in what type of areas, shade tolerant or full sun, I think those are things before you do any planting. It's good to talk to a professional forester, or someone at the nursery, or someone who knows what trees and species are going to grow where you live. I see a lot of folks just ordering trees, not knowing what grows best, and they have poor success, and they think they don't know why their trees are. And if they would have taken the extra step and talked to someone about their land and what their plans were, they could have saved some money and some time and some heartache, watching their money be wasted on trees that aren't going to grow. Trees have lots of different needs, so it's good to narrow it down. What species trees are not going to grow well upland, and vice versa. You don't want to plant, conifers, you know, there's a wide breadth of things. I guess you could go into major detail, but I guess knowing what to plant where is super crucial.
Right.
Yeah, oh,
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I agree, and I could nerd out on that for hours and the sylvics of individual species and their traits. But I think one place for starting for woodland owners is to really to learn the native plant communities that are part of your forest, because there's like these assemblages. And so knowing like, I have an oaky pine forest or I have a floodplain forest, like if you can at least get to that part, you don't have to know necessarily every species, but you know, if you can get to the point where you kind of know the community type, you know, that's going to give you a sense of, you know, where to start. Because if you know, like I have an oaky pine forest, then, you know, it's going to be like, okay, well, that makes sense. Then I might be looking for something like red pine or white pine. And so I think that's if you're just starting to get to know your woods, I think that's a really fantastic place to start. Barbara.
Yes, if you know any, lots of times the nurseries too will provide descriptions with the trees, like if they will tolerate having their roots wet, if you're going to plant in a wet area or a dry area, like my property where I've got hills and different facing slopes and deep hollows and dry ridges. I've got all kinds of different sites. So as Maria said, you know what you have, and know more about what types of stuff is going to be there. If you're thinking of creating openings, you need to be cautious of invasives, because invasives really love any kind of open or disturbed area. So that's the thing to keep in mind. And maybe if you know some of the history of your property, that may also, that's reflected somewhat in the species you have. Like the property photo I showed that was taken 60 some years ago, where a lot of the property had been cleared, that's now mostly yellow poplar, because that's what would have seeded in at the time. We didn't have invasives back then, at least not in the numbers we have now. So, but that same area, when some ice damage came in, then that's where the tree of heaven had a chance to get a foothold. And also with these invasives, as Brooke has done, and well, in Barry as well, you know, once you get some invasives out, you need to put something else in there, or else a friend of mine, she got rid of the stilt grass only to have it replaced by garlic mustard. So if you can try to plan ahead for what you're going to put in that hole that you're going to create, then that's a good thing too.
Great, thank you. We have a question coming in from Jean at the Briar Patch, she's based in the Piedmont of North Carolina, where her trees are chestnut, white and red oaks, and poplar. And she was asking about sprouting. So she says, when regenerating forests by sprouting stumps, do you limit the number of sprouts?
Not necessarily initially, but if you can get in there maybe 20 years or within 20 years after the cut, then you can start doing like a crop tree release. You could pick the best stems out of those sprouts. And sometimes you get in there earlier than that, but it depends on, you know, how quickly those sprouts are growing. But give them a chance to kind of show which one's going to be the best. And then you can go in and choose 1 or 2 sprouts per stump that you want to keep, and cut the rest of them and make something out of them. There's some places that we was involved with a project where we were looking for walking sticks, and the company that was providing them, they went into areas that had been harvested by the Forest Service and had permission to go in and do a thinning, and what they cut as sprouts ended up being perfect walking sticks. So.
Nice. All right. So we have talked a lot about active stewardship in a lot of ways, from planning to what's going on in your understory, to running goats, to managing invasives. We haven't talked a lot in detail about timber harvesting. And Barry has this really awesome resource that she's prepared of timber harvesting do's and don'ts. And this goes along with a question that came in the chat earlier, about, you know, if someone could speak to kind of spending and making money, sort of the business side of things. And then Star's also asking about, Brooke, do you have a website that overviews your goat business? Seems like you're going to have some, your goats are going to be going on the road pretty soon. Let's see. But I guess does
Sure,
anyone?
I'll put it in the chat.
Awesome, thank you, Brooke. So I'm gonna pull up Barry's timber harvesting do's and don'ts, but I wonder if anyone wants to start by kind of addressing that general question about spending and making money on your woodlot. Where do you get started?
I'll tackle that one. Unless you're a forester yourself or married to one or have a lot of knowledge about all these things, I would suggest, first of all, finding a forester to work with in your area and shop around a little bit. Find someone who you feel you can trust and who understands your objectives and who isn't trying to like put their ideas down your throat. So shop around, find out what their prices are, references, talk to references, ask to see woodlots that they've managed. Maybe ask to see other management plans that they've done. But if you can find someone to work with you in the long run on your woodlot would be a great thing. Just like you would choose your primary care doctor. You want to feel good about that person and trust them, and also hope it'll be a long-term relationship. And it's kind of the same thing with your forester. So I suggest starting with that first. And then that forester will be able to help you, guide you through the financial aspects of the woodlot. They would know, if you do want to have some trees cut to make money, they would have an idea of, is this the right thing for the land, and what are your options, and who are the best loggers, and what's the best time of year. And I mean, I can go on and on about this for hours, which we don't have now, but anyway, there's lots of questions, and it's good to do your research before you delve into something or sign a contract. And if you hear a deal from a logger, something that sounds too good to be true, it probably is.
And another
So-
thing that, excuse me, sorry.
No,
Barry.
I can shut it down there.
And another thing that the forester can help you with is the various tax aspects of selling timber and investing in your property. They can help you develop a basis for your property that helps then when you do have a timber sale. In other words, the value of the timber when you bought that land can be, and what you paid for it can be deducted from the capital gains that you make from selling your timber. And then if you also are investing in crop tree release or invasives, any of those things, keep records of that, and that too can be used as part of your taxes. But forester can definitely help you through with that.
Brooke, any additional advice from your neck of the woods on finding a forester that you'd want to work with?
I would reach out to your local DNR office, private consultant, foresters. I'm sure there's there's got to be a nationwide database of consultant foresters within your state and their service areas. I don't have the link handy, but yeah, and like Barry was saying, make sure you do your homework. Do like you would be remodeling your kitchen. You'd like to meet a few different folks, find someone who you're comfortable with working, someone you get a good vibe from. Same thing when you get to the point where you're selling your timber. Shop around a little, make sure you feel comfortable with the person doing the logging for you. Check out other jobs that they've done on other properties and see if you like what you see. Again, do your homework too. Timber harvest, it's not a clean process. It looks a little messy at first. So familiarize with, I guess, what you see and right away with the timber harvest and know what you're getting into. But yeah, shop around for someone who you're comfortable with. Again, there's vast lists of consultant foresters and state foresters that can help you with your planning. Yeah, sorry, I don't have a link handy to get
Oh,
to.
good. Yeah, I think there's different, yep, Maria's ahead of me. Many states have lists of licensed or registered foresters, and the Association of Consulting Foresters is active in some states. So thanks for sharing that. Yeah, and most states, like state DNR, as Brooke said, have a website with a list of, they're called something different, but in each state a little bit, but some list of consulting foresters. And usually there's a district forester or a state forester or a county forester that is able to meet with you for free. your tax dollars at work to help you get started and find the consultant that you'll work with more closely. In the last few minutes before we need to wrap up, so we talked about finding a forester to help you. So Barry, if I can turn back to you briefly, so what's the difference between a forester and the logger when it comes to timber harvesting? What are the different roles that they play? And for folks, I did drop the link to Barry's timber harvesting do's and don'ts for your leisure reading later.
Well, that's a really good question, Amanda. And people often do use the term logger and forester interchangeably, and they're definitely different roles. I look at managing the land as kind of a triad. You of course need to have the landowner and the land, otherwise nothing's going to happen. And the logger is the person who actually carries out the harvesting, does the cutting of trees. And the forester is the person who acts as the landowner's agent, their eyes and ears on the ground, make sure that the job is getting done according to their specs, usually provides contracts and that sort of thing, maybe marks the trees for harvest. But the forester's job is to kind of facilitate and again, be the agent of the landowner. Sometimes you'll see foresters who are hired by industry and provide, quote, free services to landowners. You know, as a consultant forester, that's always kind of a bee in our bonnet, because you have to think about the forester you're working with. Where is their first allegiance? Is it to the person that's writing their paycheck as an industrial forester, or as a consultant? You know, basically our landowners are writing our paycheck. So that's where our first allegiance is. So that's something to think about when you might get offered free forestry services. Again, you know, sometimes you get what you pay for along that line. Did that kind of explain the difference, the different roles?
Yeah, I think so. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, I just want to add one more thing too, that, you know, you really, I mean, I like to, of course, encourage people to work with foresters. There are some really good loggers out there. There's a few bad apples, as there are in any profession, but there are some great loggers out there who will do good work and understand silviculture, which is, you know, what you're trying to do in the forest. So it's really, those are the loggers you really want to choose to work with, because you don't want to work with someone that you have to babysit or you have to worry about or anything like that, because it's just trouble in the long run.
Great, thank you.
Mhm.
We have a few more minutes for maybe another question or two. So give folks a moment to unmute or type something into the chat window. This is where we need the background music again. While folks might be typing, I do want to point out there's a really wealth of resources in the chat window. So you can save that chat. In the bottom right corner, there's a little ... And if you click on the ... you should have an option pop up to save the chat. So you can save all of those hyperlinks and see all the resources that have been shared. Boy, oh boy. Okay, I'm not seeing or hearing more questions. We had a lot of great questions during this session. So maybe for just a final round. Oh, wait, there's one more. Oh, thanks. This was fun. Yes, indeed. So just as a final round, kind of a concluding thought, what would you like to send people home with as a thought for something to inspire them as they're thinking about active stewardship of their land?
Spend time on your land, get to know it, get to know what is important to you, what means the most to you on that land, and that will help you determine what direction to go in.
I completely agree. That's what I've been thinking about before this, and then seeing everyone else's presentations is just like, even if it's small stuff and seemingly small stuff like putting up birdhouses or whatever it is that gets you out there, just interacting is, I think, the best place to start.
Oh, Barry, you're muted.
I know. I would just expand on that and say, don't always walk on the same trails all the time. Go different places, go places you don't usually use, or you don't usually go to. Sometimes when I work with clients and I'm doing cruising on their land, I'm walking back and forth in a systematic way, and they come with me and they say, I've never seen this place before. I've never looked at it from this perspective. So go all over the place. Don't just limit yourself to the tried and true familiar.
Yeah, I'd just add the best time to start is now. You know, start small. What's the old saying? The best time to plant a tree was yesterday. You know, go ahead, start small with a small project. Plant plan a little something every year, carve out a little corner that you want to focus on, and just get out and do a little something each year.
Fantastic. And Amy just popped into the chat also. Take the time to know your land. We had our property for 3 years, spent a lot of time exploring and visualizing before we did anything. Sometimes your goals will change. So I think that goes back to Brooke, like you keep saying, it's a marathon, not a sprint. All right. So what fun activities are you looking forward to this year on your land the most, I suppose? Doesn't have to be active stewardship, but
Well, I'm looking forward to trying to get that trail that I've been walking over this winter to try to get it actually relocated so we can get the four-wheeler through there and use that as our way to get the firewood out.
I'm looking forward to growing my shrubs, my native shrubs, and also looking at treehouse plans. Tree office plans.
I've been thinking of getting like a little electric chainsaw. I've heard good things about the electric chainsaws. So every time I go for a walk, I think, oh, there's this, there's this tree over the trail. I could cut this. I could do this limbing. So that's kind of what I'm thinking. My old gas chainsaws pretty much died. So I like the idea of electric one.
Yeah, that's part of the fun, Barry. I have what I call my baby chainsaw I got as a Christmas gift a couple years ago from my husband. So how romantic, right? But having the right fun tools to do things, they're fun to use. So yeah, I have some trees I need to tube. So I guess that's what I'm looking forward to. We planted some seedlings, and I need to get them protected from the deer before they find them amongst the brush and everything else. So I guess that's what I'm looking forward to, watching my trees grow. Does that count?
Yeah, totally. Quick note on chainsaws. There's a lot of resources on the womenowningwoodlands.net website about chainsaws. In the workshops I've been at, we do recommend gas saws because chaps are not actually rated to stop an electric chainsaw. Most chaps are not. So just electric saws might be lighter and battery powered, but keep in mind that the chaps are not designed to stop them. So just good fun fact. But yeah, check out womenowningwoodlands.net and you can search for chainsaws, and there's lots of great resources. And Barry, I think there's an opening in the women's chainsaw safety class in Unity this weekend. If you want to go hang out with Tish and some other fun people. But anyhow, we are just before the top of the hour. So wherever you are out there, please join me in a virtual round of applause for our fabulous panelists, Maria, Barry, Brooke, and Barb. This was so much fun. I can't thank you guys enough. Stay safe. I really hope we can all get together in everybody's woodlot someday soon. Bravo.